Jack McKee treated patients coldly until illness taught him compassion. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to walk in the shoes of someone you have only ever judged from a distance? Imagine the person who saves lives, who operates with precision and confidence, suddenly confronted with the vulnerability and uncertainty that they have never truly acknowledged in others. Today, we are about to dive into a story that explores the delicate balance between expertise and empathy, between professional achievement and human connection. Stay with us as we follow a journey that reveals how a life turned upside down can transform the way one views not only their career, but the very essence of human compassion. You are about to meet a character whose path will challenge the way you think about care, responsibility, and the quiet power of empathy. Now, let us return to our main character. Jack McKee was a man defined by his work. As a prominent surgeon at one of the busiest hospitals in the city, he had built a reputation for his surgical skill, his sharp decision-making, and his unyielding commitment to results. Every procedure he performed was approached with precision and confidence. Every patient he treated was evaluated with the same clinical detachment that had earned him accolades from his peers. His days were long, filled with operations, consultations, and administrative responsibilities. Jack measured success by the survival rates of his patients, the efficiency of his operating room, and the respect of his colleagues. He was undeniably good at what he did, but there was a cost hidden beneath the surface. Despite his professional excellence, Jack McKee was known for being distant and emotionally reserved. He rarely engaged with his patients beyond the necessary medical explanations. His conversations were often clinical, concise, and devoid of warmth. Family members of patients frequently left appointments feeling unheard, frustrated, or alienated. Jack had mastered the art of controlling the medical environment, but he had neglected the human side of care. He believed that saving lives was the ultimate measure of compassion, and in his mind, there was no need to concern himself with the discomfort, fear, or emotional needs of those in his care. This detachment was not malicious. Jack did not intentionally cause pain or neglect feelings. He simply valued efficiency, mastery, and outcome above all else. He had grown accustomed to seeing people primarily as cases to solve, procedures to perform, and statistics to improve. Over time, this perspective had created an invisible wall between him and those he treated. Patients sensed it, colleagues noticed it, yet Jack remained largely unaware of the distance he had created. It was an environment where excellence in the operating room could coexist with emotional coldness outside of it, and Jack thrived in that world. Outside the hospital, Jack's life reflected the same structure and focus. His apartment was neat, minimalist, and devoid of distractions. His social interactions were few, and he often prioritized work over personal connections. His friends admired his dedication but lamented his lack of emotional availability. Romantic relationships rarely lasted, as he had difficulty expressing empathy or vulnerability. For Jack, life was measured in schedules, accomplishments, and measurable success. There was little room for the unpredictable, messy aspects of human experience that make compassion necessary. Even among his peers, Jack's demeanor was respected and sometimes feared. Junior doctors looked up to him for his skill, but hesitated to approach him with questions that seemed personal or nuanced. Nurses and staff followed his instructions efficiently, recognizing his authority, but there was little warmth in their interactions. In meetings, he dominated discussions with precise recommendations, leaving little space for debate or emotional context. In every way, Jack McKee had built a world in which he could excel professionally while remaining emotionally insulated. And yet, underneath this confident exterior, there were subtle signs of fragility. Jack occasionally felt fleeting moments of doubt when he observed suffering he could not alleviate, or when a patient's family expressed anger or grief. He would quickly dismiss these feelings, focusing instead on the next procedure, the next consultation, the next measurable outcome. In his mind, emotions were distractions, and efficiency was a virtue. This self-imposed detachment had served him well for decades, but it had also created a blind spot that Jack was about to encounter in the most unexpected and life-altering way. The story of Jack McKee is not just the story of a surgeon. It is the story of the human heart meeting its own limitations, of professional certainty colliding with personal vulnerability. It is the prelude to a journey that will redefine how he sees himself, his patients, and the meaning of care. Jack's mastery of medicine has never been questioned, but his understanding of humanity is about to be tested in ways he could never anticipate. Jack McKee's approach to medicine was methodical and disciplined, but it left little room for human connection. Patients were often treated as clinical challenges rather than individuals experiencing fear, pain, and uncertainty. He focused on diagnoses, treatment plans, and surgical outcomes, rarely acknowledging the emotional toll that illness exacted on those under his care. The waiting rooms were full of anxious faces, yet Jack rarely paused to consider what these patients were experiencing beyond their medical charts. For him, efficiency and precision were paramount, and any distraction from these objectives was unwelcome. Colleagues admired Jack for his unwavering focus and his exceptional technical skill. They respected his ability to handle complex surgeries with confidence and speed. Junior doctors studied his techniques, aspiring to emulate his competence in the operating room. Nurses followed his directives meticulously, recognizing his authority and expertise. Despite the respect he commanded, there was an undeniable emotional distance in every interaction. Jack's communication was clear but devoid of warmth. While he saved lives with remarkable consistency, he remained detached from the human suffering that accompanied his work. Outside of the operating room, Jack's detachment extended into his personal life. His apartment reflected the same sense of control and order that governed his professional world. Every item had its place. Every day had its schedule. He rarely allowed interruptions or spontaneous events to disrupt his routine. Friendships existed, but they were often formal and transactional. Social engagements were infrequent, and he approached them with the same efficiency he applied to surgical procedures. Romantic relationships were brief, hindered by his inability to express vulnerability or empathy. Jack had constructed a life in which predictability and competence were valued above all else, leaving little space for emotional engagement. Even in his hospital, Jack's demeanor was a study in controlled professionalism. He made decisions with precision, often leaving little room for dialogue or differing perspectives. Meetings were dominated by his recommendations, delivered confidently and without hesitation. Colleagues deferred to his judgment, aware of his knowledge and experience. While his efficiency and skill were unquestioned, the atmosphere around him lacked warmth. Staff and patients alike recognized his excellence, but they also recognized the absence of empathy, the emotional gap that defined his interactions. Yet there were occasional cracks in Jack's armor of detachment. He sometimes noticed moments of human suffering that he could not immediately address: an anxious family member, a patient struggling with chronic pain, a colleague quietly overwhelmed by responsibility. These moments stirred brief awareness of the emotional dimensions he had long ignored. He would acknowledge the feeling for a moment, then redirect his focus to the next procedure, the next patient, the next objective. For Jack, emotions were potential distractions, while measurable outcomes were the true indicators of success. This approach, however, carried consequences. Families left appointments feeling dismissed or misunderstood. Patients complied with treatment plans but often felt unseen. Junior staff learned technical excellence from Jack, but observed little demonstration of compassion or emotional understanding. Over time, the culture within the department reflected these priorities. Precision and skill were celebrated, empathy was overlooked. The system functioned efficiently, yet the human side of care was minimized. Jack's brilliance as a surgeon was unquestioned, but his impact as a healer in the full sense of the word was limited. As Jack moved through his routines, he remained unaware of the profound gap between his professional achievements and the human connection that he had neglected. He measured his life in successful operations, positive outcomes, and professional recognition. Yet beneath the surface, subtle tensions hinted at what he had overlooked. Patients' quiet frustrations, colleagues' unspoken concerns, and his own fleeting moments of doubt suggested that his approach, while effective, was incomplete. The emotional side of medicine was an aspect he had yet to confront, a dimension that would soon become unavoidable. Jack McKee's story at this point was one of competence and detachment, of mastery in the operating room counterbalanced by emotional distance in every other aspect of life. The foundation of his professional success was solid, but it rested on a limited understanding of what it truly means to care for another human being. His life was about to shift in ways that would challenge the very principles upon which he had built his career. And now, having seen Jack's world before the turning point, we are poised to witness the event that will change everything: the moment when Jack McKee steps into the role of the patient. The turning point in Jack McKee's life arrived with sudden and undeniable clarity. A routine examination revealed abnormal test results that required immediate attention. Jack, the surgeon who had spent decades diagnosing and treating others with precision and confidence, now faced uncertainty as a patient. The tables had turned, and he could no longer observe from a position of control. Suddenly, he was confronted with the vulnerability he had long ignored in those under his care. The first days after the diagnosis were disorienting. Jack moved through a series of tests, scans, and consultations, each designed to determine the extent of his illness. He observed the hospital environment from a new perspective, noticing the subtle ways patients were handled, the small gestures of kindness that were often overlooked, and the systemic shortcomings that sometimes left patients feeling anxious or neglected. Every procedure reminded him that medical care was not only about technical expertise but also about the human experience surrounding it. For the first time, Jack felt what many of his patients had felt: fear, uncertainty, and lack of control. He experienced the anxiety of waiting for results, the discomfort of medical interventions, and the quiet tension of not knowing what would come next. These were sensations he had previously only witnessed from a professional distance, evaluated clinically, and quickly moved past. Now they were personal, immediate, and impossible to ignore. The detachment that had defined his career was no longer a shield against human emotion. Jack also began to notice the emotional dimension of care that he had previously undervalued. Small acts: a nurse offering reassurance, a doctor taking extra time to explain a procedure, a staff member adjusting a pillow for comfort, suddenly appeared significant. These gestures, which he had once considered minor or even irrelevant, carried a profound weight when he was the one experiencing vulnerability. He started to understand how much his patients had depended on these subtle forms of attention and empathy, and how frequently such care had been missing in his own interactions. The experience challenged Jack's assumptions about the role of a physician. His previous focus on outcomes, efficiency, and technical mastery was necessary but no longer sufficient in his own eyes. Being a patient forced him to confront the emotional landscape of illness, the fears, the doubts, the frustrations, and the moments of hope that punctuated every hospital visit. He realized that these elements were central to healing, and that true competence required engagement with both the body and the mind of the patient. Through conversations with his own medical team, Jack gained insight into how patients perceive care. He recognized that a diagnosis alone was not enough to alleviate fear, and that medical authority did not automatically provide comfort. The way information was delivered, the tone of voice, and the attention to emotional cues could dramatically affect a patient's experience. For someone who had spent his life prioritizing efficiency over empathy, this realization was both humbling and transformative. As Jack navigated tests, procedures, and consultations, he began to reflect on his own past behavior. He remembered patients who had expressed fear, confusion, or grief, and recalled moments when he had responded with clinical detachment. The stark contrast between his experiences as a patient and his previous approach made the emotional gap undeniable. For the first time, he truly understood the consequences of his lack of empathy. This period marked the beginning of a profound internal shift. Jack started to question the balance he had struck between professional mastery and human compassion. He understood that his technical skill, while impressive, was incomplete without the ability to connect with those he served. He realized that healing was as much about addressing emotional needs as it was about performing procedures correctly. The seeds of change had been planted, and Jack McKee's transformation from a detached surgeon to a compassionate healer had begun in earnest. The story of Jack McKee is not simply about illness. It is about awakening to the human dimension of medicine. The journey he has begun will challenge his identity, test his assumptions, and ultimately redefine his approach to life, work, and care. Having entered the world of vulnerability firsthand, Jack is on a path that will illuminate both his limitations and his potential for empathy. As Jack McKee settled into the role of a patient, he began to experience firsthand the vulnerabilities he had long observed only from a professional distance. Each day brought new encounters with medical procedures, waiting periods, and interactions with staff that highlighted the complexity of the patient experience. The sterile environment of the hospital, once familiar to him as a surgeon, now felt unfamiliar and, at times, intimidating. He could not simply rely on his knowledge or technical skill to navigate this new reality. He had to confront the uncertainty, fear, and discomfort inherent in being treated for a serious illness. The physical sensations of illness were disorienting. Jack endured blood tests, scans, and imaging procedures, each step reminding him of the lack of control he now faced. He felt the subtle anxieties that accompany waiting for results, the discomfort of needles and monitors, and the frustration of being dependent on others for guidance and care. These sensations, which he had long dismissed as routine or minor for his patients, now held significant weight. Jack could finally understand the apprehension his patients had experienced when facing similar procedures. Beyond the physical aspects, the emotional and psychological impact of his illness became increasingly apparent. Jack noticed how a simple gesture of attention could significantly influence a patient's sense of security and dignity. A nurse taking a moment to explain the process, a doctor offering reassurance, or a staff member providing comfort during a difficult procedure could make an otherwise stressful experience more manageable. For Jack, these were not superficial acts. They were integral to the overall experience of care. The subtlety and importance of empathy, once invisible in his role as a surgeon, became undeniable. Jack began to reflect on his own behavior toward patients in light of these experiences. He recalled instances when he had delivered instructions in a detached, clinical manner, overlooking the emotional responses of those he treated. He realized that his technical competence, though crucial, had often been accompanied by a lack of acknowledgement for the human side of illness. The discomfort and anxiety he now felt as a patient mirrored the fears he had inadvertently contributed to in others. This recognition stirred in him a profound sense of accountability and a desire to change. Interactions with his medical team offered additional insights. Jack observed how the tone, clarity, and patience of a physician or nurse could significantly alter a patient's understanding and confidence in the treatment process. He learned that medical authority alone did not alleviate fear or provide comfort. Patients required more than precise diagnoses and effective treatment. They required communication, attentiveness, and the assurance that their concerns were valued. These lessons, once abstract, became concrete and deeply personal for Jack. Throughout this period, Jack also experienced moments of frustration and helplessness. Waiting for results, navigating hospital protocols, and managing his own uncertainty reminded him of the emotional strain that patients endure daily. He understood the importance of clear communication and active listening, realizing that these elements were often overlooked in his previous practice. The gap between technical skill and compassionate care had never been so apparent. This phase of Jack's journey marked the beginning of a fundamental transformation. He recognized that healing extended beyond surgical success or clinical accuracy. True care involved understanding the full spectrum of a patient's experience, addressing both physical and emotional needs. Jack's awareness of his own vulnerabilities allowed him to develop empathy in ways he had never imagined possible. He began to envision a new approach to medicine, one in which technical excellence and human compassion were inseparable. By the end of this period, Jack McKee had internalized a crucial lesson. The role of a healer was not solely defined by skill or outcomes, but by the ability to connect with patients as human beings. The walls of detachment that had once insulated him from the emotional dimensions of care began to crumble. Jack's experience as a patient had awakened a sensitivity that would profoundly influence his actions, decisions, and interactions moving forward. As Jack McKee progressed through his treatment, the lessons of vulnerability and empathy began to solidify into a profound shift in perspective. He was no longer merely observing the patient experience. He was living it. Each interaction with doctors, nurses, and staff offered insight into how emotional care could influence recovery and overall well-being. The previously unnoticed details, the tone of a conversation, the clarity of an explanation, the reassurance provided during moments of anxiety suddenly carried profound significance. Jack realized that these aspects of care, though subtle, were essential to the human experience of healing. This awareness sparked a deep internal reflection. Jack examined the way he had treated patients in his past practice, recalling moments when his focus on efficiency and outcome had overshadowed the emotional needs of those he served. He remembered patients expressing fear or confusion, families seeking comfort, and colleagues attempting to provide context that he had disregarded. The contrast between these memories and his current experiences highlighted a significant gap in his approach. Jack began to acknowledge that technical excellence, while vital, was insufficient without compassion. Recognizing this gap led Jack to a deliberate reassessment of his professional philosophy. He began to imagine how he could integrate empathy into his practice without compromising his surgical skill. He considered the importance of listening actively, explaining procedures thoroughly, and validating the concerns of patients and their families. These actions, he realized, were not merely courteous, they were transformative. They could reduce anxiety, build trust, and enhance the overall effectiveness of medical care. Jack understood that healing required a balance between precision and humanity. The shift in perception was reinforced through daily interactions with the medical team caring for him. Jack observed how colleagues who combined technical skill with attentiveness and empathy achieved better outcomes in patient satisfaction and cooperation. He noticed the calm reassurance a nurse provided before a procedure, the patience with which a physician explained complex information, and the consistent acknowledgement of emotional responses. These observations reinforced the lesson that medicine was as much about human connection as it was about expertise. Jack also experienced a renewed sense of humility. Confronting his own vulnerability reminded him that he could not assume omnipotence in the face of illness. No amount of knowledge could eliminate fear, uncertainty, or pain. This recognition reshaped his understanding of professional responsibility. Jack realized that acknowledging limitations and addressing emotional needs were critical components of truly effective medical care. He began to internalize the idea that compassion was not a weakness but a strength that complemented skill. This period marked the beginning of active change in Jack's behavior. He began to practice empathy consciously, even in small interactions with hospital staff and fellow patients. A simple act of gratitude, a question to understand a colleague's perspective, or attention to a patient's concern became opportunities to apply what he had learned. Each action reinforced the connection between emotional awareness and professional effectiveness. Jack's transformation was no longer theoretical. It was practical and observable. By the conclusion of this phase, Jack McKee had developed a more holistic understanding of medicine. He recognized that the physician's role extended beyond performing procedures and achieving measurable outcomes. True care required attentiveness to the emotional, psychological, and social dimensions of illness. Jack's experiences as a patient had reshaped his perception of healing, instilling in him a commitment to balance expertise with empathy. The foundation of his transformation was set, and he was prepared to carry these lessons forward into his professional and personal life. Jack's journey at this stage demonstrated the power of lived experience in cultivating empathy. It revealed that technical skill alone could never substitute for the human connection essential to meaningful medical care. He was beginning to embody the principle that a compassionate healer combines precision with understanding, expertise with empathy, and action with attentiveness. After internalizing the lessons of empathy and vulnerability, Jack McKee faced his first professional challenge since his transformation. A patient arrived with a complex medical condition, requiring not only surgical expertise, but also careful communication and emotional support. Previously, Jack would have focused exclusively on the technical aspects, outlining procedures and expected outcomes in a precise, clinical manner. Now, he approached the case with a fundamentally different mindset, integrating compassion into every interaction. Jack began by dedicating time to listen actively to the patient and the family. He asked questions to understand their concerns, fears, and expectations, rather than simply explaining the medical plan. He observed their reactions, paying attention to both verbal and nonverbal cues. Each response informed how he adjusted his explanations, ensuring that the patient and family felt heard, understood, and respected. This approach contrasted sharply with the detached professionalism that had previously defined him. Throughout the consultation, Jack emphasized transparency and reassurance. He provided detailed explanations about the treatment process, potential risks, and expected outcomes, taking care to ensure comprehension. When the patient expressed anxiety, he responded not only with factual clarification, but also with genuine acknowledgement of the emotional experience. Jack's tone, body language, and attentiveness conveyed empathy, demonstrating that he valued the patient's perspective as much as the medical facts. In the operating room, Jack applied the same principles. He maintained technical precision and focused on achieving optimal outcomes, but he also ensured that the patient's dignity and comfort were prioritized. Preoperative conversations included encouragement and support, and postoperative follow-ups emphasized listening and understanding. The integration of empathy into his professional conduct transformed the quality of care, creating a sense of trust and confidence that extended beyond the procedure itself. The response from the patient and family was immediate and profound. They expressed relief, reassurance, and appreciation for Jack's attentiveness. The patient's anxiety decreased, and the family's confidence in the treatment plan grew. Jack observed firsthand how empathy and communication could directly impact not only the experience, but also the cooperation and engagement of those under his care. He realized that effective healing involved both skillful action and emotional connection. Jack's colleagues also noticed the change. Nurses and fellow physicians observed the difference in his approach, noting the warmth and attentiveness he now demonstrated. Some were surprised, as they had long associated Jack McKee with detachment and efficiency. Others were inspired, recognizing that his example offered a model for integrating human connection into high-pressure medical environments. Jack's transformation was becoming visible, not only to his patients, but also to his professional community. This initial application of empathy reinforced the lessons Jack had learned as a patient. He experienced the satisfaction of connecting meaningfully with someone in need, understanding that healing was most effective when emotional and psychological support complemented medical expertise. Each interaction strengthened his resolve to continue practicing medicine in this integrated, human-centered way. By the end of this case, Jack McKee had taken a decisive step from theory into practice. He had demonstrated that technical skill and empathy are not mutually exclusive but mutually reinforcing. This experience solidified his belief that compassionate care is an essential component of professional excellence. Jack was now prepared to extend these principles across all aspects of his work, transforming not only his own approach, but also the broader culture of care within his hospital. As Jack McKee continued to apply the lessons he had learned, the impact of his transformation began to extend beyond individual patient interactions and into the broader hospital environment. Colleagues, nurses, and other staff began to notice a change not only in his demeanor, but also in the culture of communication within his team. Jack no longer relied solely on authority or technical skill to command respect. Instead, he demonstrated leadership through attentiveness, empathy, and collaboration. Interactions with junior doctors shifted dramatically. Previously, he had maintained a strict hierarchical approach, emphasizing efficiency and precision above all else. Now he actively encouraged questions, listened carefully to observations, and provided guidance with patience. He shared insights not only about surgical techniques but also about how to approach patients with understanding and compassion. This mentorship fostered a sense of trust and openness that had been largely absent before. Nurses and support staff also responded to the change. They observed that Jack valued their input and respected their professional judgment, which had a positive effect on workflow and morale. Communication became more fluid and collaborative. Team members felt empowered to contribute ideas and voice concerns, knowing that their perspectives were appreciated. The hospital environment, once defined by efficiency alone, began to incorporate a human-centered approach to care, guided in part by Jack's example. Jack's interactions with patients continued to reflect his new philosophy. He consistently prioritized active listening, clear explanations, and reassurance, creating a sense of trust and security. Patients reported greater satisfaction, reduced anxiety, and increased confidence in treatment plans. Families expressed appreciation for his attentiveness, noting that he addressed emotional as well as physical needs. These outcomes reinforced Jack's belief that empathy and skill must coexist for effective medical care. The transformation extended to Jack's personal perspective as well. He began to reflect on relationships outside the hospital, considering how attentiveness and empathy could improve interactions with friends, colleagues, and family. His own awareness of vulnerability and the importance of human connection informed not only his professional conduct, but also his approach to everyday life. Jack recognized that leadership, whether in medicine or in personal relationships, is enhanced by understanding and compassion. Challenges remained, of course. Not every colleague immediately adjusted to his new style, and some resisted changes to long-established workflows. Jack approached these obstacles with patience, explaining the rationale for his approach and demonstrating its effectiveness through consistent practice. He understood that lasting change required both example and reinforcement, not just intention. Over time, however, the positive effects of his approach became increasingly evident. By the conclusion of this period, Jack McKee had established himself as a physician who combined technical excellence with human compassion. His transformation was reflected not only in his individual actions, but also in the broader culture of his hospital. Team dynamics improved, patient satisfaction increased, and the standard for care expanded beyond clinical outcomes to include emotional and psychological support. Jack's journey illustrated that true leadership and effective medicine are inseparable from empathy, communication, and respect. This phase of Jack's story demonstrates that the impact of personal growth extends far beyond oneself. By embracing compassion, he influenced the attitudes, behaviors, and expectations of those around him, creating a ripple effect that enhanced both professional practice and patient experience. Jack McKee had moved from detachment to connection, from authority alone to leadership informed by understanding, and from technical mastery to holistic care. Through months of self-reflection and practical application, Jack McKee came to understand that the practice of medicine extended far beyond technical skill. His experiences as a patient had revealed dimensions of care that he had previously neglected: emotional support, active listening, and the validation of fear and uncertainty. Jack recognized that the human experience of illness was inseparable from the medical interventions required to treat it. True healing required attention to both the physical and emotional aspects of the patient's journey. Jack observed the profound impact that empathy had on recovery and patient satisfaction. Patients who felt understood and supported were more likely to follow treatment plans, communicate openly about symptoms, and demonstrate confidence in their care. Families, reassured by clear communication and attentiveness, were able to provide better support, which in turn contributed to positive outcomes. Jack realized that the human dimension of medicine was not a luxury or optional complement. It was essential for effective care. The lessons he learned reshaped his understanding of the physician's role. Competence in surgery or diagnostics alone was insufficient. The ability to recognize, acknowledge, and respond to the emotional states of patients and their families became an equally important measure of professional excellence. Jack internalized the concept that the most effective physicians integrate empathy with expertise, technical precision with attentiveness to human experience. He understood that compassion could enhance both clinical outcomes and the overall patient experience. Jack also reflected on the organizational implications of his transformation. He recognized that hospitals and medical teams could improve patient outcomes by fostering cultures of empathy and communication. Leaders who demonstrated attentiveness and respect influenced colleagues and staff, creating environments in which patients felt valued and understood. Jack's personal journey highlighted the broader impact of emotional intelligence within medical institutions, reinforcing the idea that human-centered care benefits both patients and healthcare providers. The evolution of Jack McKee's perspective extended into his professional philosophy. He began to incorporate structured opportunities for dialogue, explanation, and emotional support into his practice. Consultations became two-way conversations, not one-sided instructions. Preoperative and postoperative interactions were approached with attentiveness to anxiety, confusion, and hope. Jack found that these efforts did not compromise efficiency. Instead, they enhanced cooperation, trust, and ultimately, treatment effectiveness. This phase also prompted Jack to reconsider his own metrics of success. Previously, he measured achievement by surgical outcomes, recovery rates, and professional recognition. Now, he understood that success also involved patient satisfaction, emotional well-being, and the quality of interpersonal engagement. He saw that a holistic approach to medicine balancing expertise and empathy yielded better outcomes and fostered a more meaningful professional life. Jack's reflection extended beyond the hospital. He realized that the principles he had learned applied to personal relationships as well. Attentiveness, understanding, and respect for the perspectives of others strengthened connections outside the workplace. His experiences as a patient provided insight into vulnerability, trust, and communication that were valuable in every aspect of life. By the end of this phase, Jack McKee had embraced a philosophy of medicine that fully integrated technical skill with compassion. His transformation illustrated that the role of a healer is defined not only by what one does with the hands, but also by what one does with the heart. Jack's journey offered a clear message. The most impactful care addresses both body and mind, recognizing the inseparability of human emotion from medical expertise. Jack McKee's journey came full circle as he returned to his professional and personal life with a renewed understanding of what it meant to be a healer. The experience of illness had fundamentally altered his perception of medicine, human connection, and responsibility. He was no longer a physician who measured success solely by technical mastery or surgical outcomes. Instead, he had embraced a holistic vision of care that combined skill with empathy, authority with attentiveness, and expertise with human understanding. In the hospital, Jack's transformation became evident in every interaction. Patients responded to his renewed approach with trust and openness, allowing him to provide more effective care. Families felt reassured, knowing that their concerns were heard and addressed. His colleagues observed the change as well, noting how Jack's model of compassionate leadership improved teamwork, communication, and morale. The culture of the hospital, influenced by Jack's example, began to reflect a balance between efficiency and human-centered care, demonstrating that excellence and empathy could coexist. Jack himself experienced a sense of fulfillment he had never known before. He understood that saving lives was important, but fostering understanding, alleviating fear, and addressing the emotional needs of patients were equally critical. These insights deepened his satisfaction and purpose in medicine. The professional pride he had once derived solely from technical accomplishments was now enriched by the knowledge that he could touch lives in a meaningful, humane way. His personal life also benefited from the lessons learned during his illness. Jack approached relationships with greater attentiveness and patience. He recognized that listening, validating emotions, and demonstrating empathy were essential to building trust and connection, whether with family, friends, or colleagues. The same principles that guided his medical practice enhanced his interactions beyond the hospital walls, fostering deeper and more meaningful connections in all areas of life. Jack's journey illustrated that transformation is not instantaneous, but rather a cumulative process shaped by experience, reflection, and deliberate application. The vulnerability he had faced as a patient allowed him to see gaps in his approach, confront limitations, and develop a stronger, more compassionate sense of self. His growth demonstrated that true mastery in any profession is incomplete without consideration for the human experience and the emotional dimensions of those we serve. By the conclusion of his journey, Jack McKee had become a physician who understood that technical skill, while vital, was only one aspect of healing. The integration of empathy, active listening, and human connection into his practice allowed him to achieve outcomes that were not only clinically successful but also emotionally meaningful. His transformation was a testament to the power of lived experience in shaping professional excellence and personal growth. The story of Jack McKee offers a universal message. The most impactful care arises when knowledge and skill are combined with compassion, when expertise is exercised alongside empathy, and when the humanity of both patient and physician is fully acknowledged. Jack's experience reminds us that medicine, at its core, is not merely a science but a human endeavor, one that requires the heart as much as the mind to achieve its fullest potential.